Today I'm going to be talking you through my process of how I would design a hybrid animal. But the first thing I'm talking about here is some basic advice for drawing really anything, but we're drawing animals today, so advice for drawing an animal. I am starting with the largest shapes first, and then adding the smaller and smaller shapes until I get down to the really fine details. And the reason that I draw this way is because if you start with the larger shapes first, you get a better idea for the proportions that you're wanting to create. If you start off with the really tiny details and then work your way larger, it can be very easy to end up with some strange proportions in the end because you're so hyper focused on those little details that you're not thinking about the bigger picture. So, again, I've said it before, but this is my process. This is what works for me. I think it's pretty good advice for starting out. If you eventually end up with a different process that works better for you, that is perfectly fine. There's not one right way to do things, but I am going to advise that this is going to be a simpler way to start. Largest to smallest. So here I'm working on those little last few tiny details. And I will let you know, I drew this picture while looking at a reference photo. So a picture of a kangaroo to give me an idea for the proportions. And I ended it with tracing the lines with a pen and erasing my pencil marks. Now we've done our practice and we're going to get into designing our hybrid. A hybrid is created when two or more species are crossed together. So the first thing I started out with for my planning phase was to find a bunch of reference photos that I'm going to be drawing from when I'm designing my new creature. So just like I started out with my practice kangaroo, I am starting with the largest shape first, but this time considering which parts of this animal I want to include and which parts I'm going to leave off and fill in with my next creature. So in this case, I started off with the body of a shark, and I'm leaving the head off because I'm going to be adding the head of another creature. So this is just one more thing to be thinking about because now we're not drawing an animal that exists in real life. We are making up our own hybrid animal or hybrid creature. So it's kind of like a little science fiction drawing exercise here. And now I've moved to my second reference photo, and for the head, I am actually including the head of a hyena. And here you can see my reference photo. You may also notice that my reference photo is flipped the opposite way from where the head ended up being pointed in my drawing, and that's perfectly okay because I am not worried about replicating my reference photo exactly. It's just giving me some ideas for how to arrange the features and what to include. And if you look back at that reference photo, what I ended up with is not even really very close to what the photo looks like, but I am not worried about that. It's just to give me some ideas. And now you can see that I am moving on to my next sketch. This is the first phase of my plan for what's going to end up being my final drawing, and I wasn't quite sure which animals I wanted to combine. So to get over that planning problem, I decided to do a few quick sketches, and then from those couple of quick sketches, I end up choosing my favorite to use as the inspiration for my final drawing. So I really zipped along here because I've already explained this whole process, but here's my final little sketch. And then after I've completed this little guy, I'm going to be choosing which is my favorite, and it ended up being my second sketch. That's the one I went with for my final. And now I'm going to flip over and get a new piece of paper. This paper will be my final piece and the piece of paper that my final drawing goes on. So now I am not worried about my reference photos anymore. I am only referencing my practice sketch. And once again, I am starting with the largest shape first and working my way from there, smaller and smaller until I get to those little tiny details of the facial features. And as you're watching me draw here, you may notice that I changed a few things. The toes, I decided to add kind of a webbed duck looking foot, and maybe the neck was a little bit different. I am not married to the proportions I came up with in my practice sketch, and if they end up a little bit different in my final drawing, I am perfectly okay with that because remember, we are designing something new. You don't need to feel tied to what you have already created. You don't need to feel tied to your reference photos. This is something completely new and unique for our project this week. So I'm really zipping through those final details, and the way I decided to finish my drawing was to trace over my lines with a Sharpie. Use whatever you have access to at home. So go through whatever school supplies you brought home with you, go through your junk drawer at home, see if mom and dad have office supplies you could borrow, or maybe some brothers and sisters, whoever you live with, and see what could you use to finish your drawing. I ended up with a Sharpie and some colored pencils, and if you do happen to have access to colored pencils at home, the piece of advice I'll give to you is to start out with light pressure. If you want to get the color that the pencil looks like on the outside, you do have to use more pressure to achieve that color. But by doing that, you build up a waxy surface and you can't blend colors together. So my advice would be start out with light pressure, and then you can layer colors up and create some new colors and really get some nice blends in there. And then once you're happy with what you have, you could either leave it, or now that you have your first couple layers down, it could be time to push a little bit harder and get some really shiny, dark areas of color in there as well. So I'm not going to go into too much detail past that, but really be creative this week and see what do you have at home that you could use to finish your drawing. Try to think of something that is not just a pencil line drawing. That could mean shading with pencil. That could mean tracing over your lines with pen and adding some hatching and crosshatch marks. But get creative. I'm very excited to see what you all create this week. Here's my final little creation. I look forward to speaking with all of you. Good luck, guys.